Hello and welcome to this episode of the JUXTCast. I'm Henry Garner, I'm the CTO of JUXT, and today I'm joined by Rob Moffat. Rob's the author of the book Risk First Software Development, which is now in its second edition, soon to be published, and he's also chief architect at FINOS. So hello, Rob. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Henry. Good to see you.
So we'll get to what FINOS is about in a little while, but first I'd like to start by discussing your book. Can you say a bit about how it came to be made? Like, what were you thinking about when you decided to write this book?
Yeah, so sure. So you said that it's the second edition already, and so historically, this came about because I think it was about 2018, 2019. I was working in investment banking, building IT systems, and for a while I'd been sort of capturing my thoughts in a personal blog about what was going on in investment banks. And I started to notice how what I was doing and the ways I was achieving success in the projects I was on didn't really tally up exactly with the sort of accepted dogma of methodologies like Agile. Um, and I started to look at this, and I kind of came up with a thesis that actually the way in which I was working was all about risk management and about managing risk and minimizing risks that could cause the projects I was working on to derail and go wrong. And so the book kind of came out of that idea, and also the realization that for this to work, for developers to appreciate this kind of way of working, I really needed to rehabilitate the idea of risk management, because I think for a lot of developers, they are working in bits and bytes, characters, strings, throughput, processors, all this kind of stuff, all these computer science concepts. And the idea of managing risk or risk management sounds like something another department should be doing. Sounds like something actuaries or the finance team should be up to. And therefore, that doesn't really apply to them. And so the book is kind of in large part looking at that and trying to reframe the idea of risk management so that it's acceptable and makes sense to software developers.
It's interesting you mention Agile there, and you were noticing that some of what you were doing was maybe not quite aligned with the Agile methodology. And yet, I suppose, looked at from one angle, Agile is about reducing risk in that it's, trying to work in small iterations and put things in front of customers. Can you shed any more light on what it was you were noticing you were doing that was different?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that is right. Yeah, the whole point of Agile is, let's iterate off, and we'll get fast feedback and we'll find out where things are going wrong. And that's absolutely correct. And that is a risk management strategy. What they are doing there is managing the risk of building the wrong thing, or of the customers telling them, "I'll go and build this," but the customer's not really understanding what they wanted building in the first place, or the reality on the ground not quite tallying up with the ideas that they were having. So yeah, all of this stuff is risk management, but that's not all there is to it. The landscape of the risks that you face building software is much broader than that. So, for example, you could go and build a feature um, uh, using an agile methodology, and you could build it over a few sort of iterations. But um, there are issues around that that may not be covered. So for example, you could introduce dependencies in the software that then turn out later to be to introduce risk in terms of like maybe upstream security issues, or maybe just it makes your code very complicated and hard to build. Or you might introduce issues around the conceptual integrity of the software, where it becomes less understandable to the users because you're bolting on features just to sort of meet some agile definition of what's been required. All of these things sort of fall a little bit out of the general idea of agile, and even something like having a backlog of tasks that you want to work on. That's great, but the backlog is not reflecting the risks of the items in that backlog. So it's just giving you lists of tasks to do. But really, all of those tasks should be reflecting reducing the risk for on the project for some reason. So if you're adding a feature, you're actually reducing the risk that the user doesn't have something they need and maybe throws away the software in disgust. Or if you're fixing some kind of networking problem, maybe that reduces the risk of data getting corrupted or something like that. There's always a reason,
Hmm.
a risk-based reason behind all of these things arriving on your backlog in the first place. So risk first is not about like reinventing the wheel and saying, oh, throw out Agile, throw out whatever other methodologies you're using. What it really is doing is kind of reframing the whole problem and saying, actually, the reason we have these techniques and other techniques and a whole different smorgasbord of different techniques and we use them at different times is because we have all these different risks that we're managing. So different techniques apply to manage different risks.
It sounds like what you're talking about there is providing a kind of framework for navigating trade-offs at different levels. You know, the level of the code and the application or the product, and maybe at the way the team is working. Is that true? It's providing a way that people can assess the relative benefits of different solutions.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. So um, people are always saying, oh, design is about trade-offs. And that's true. But what you're actually trading off is risk. So if I introduce some crazy new database into my product, maybe that makes it faster and allows me to store more things. But maybe it also adds a lot of a bigger learning curve for developers that are working with the system, making it more difficult to use. Or maybe it adds um, like licensing costs that might be difficult for the project to bear. So you're always trading off. You always have this notion that you're trading off one risk against another. And I introduce like a diagramming notation in the book where I show how whatever you do on a project, you're trading off some risks that you know about for some future risks that might be better or worse for you. And a useful piece of work to do is one where you end up in a better position of risk, where you've traded off some worse risks for some better ones.
So when I read this book, it really resonated for me. It felt like it provided a useful framework, a set of vocabulary, really, to describe things that maybe you already would have known intuitively, but as a way of thinking more clearly through the implications of relative strategies. And I suppose that piece around language is important because sometimes in technology we talk about things like technical debt, but then we go and we talk to business people. That's meaningless. Whereas maybe if you're talking instead about the risk of certain future bad outcomes, the ability to ship new features grinding to a halt, or um, financial implications. Perhaps this is a mechanism for cross-disciplinary communication too. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So it's like concentric circles. I start with a really sort of simple dinner party analogy, and then I spread it out to think about like development itself, and then whole organizations and departments and teams, and how risk becomes a language that they can use to talk to each other and to sort of weigh up their different concerns. So, like technical debt is a great one. So you might have the development team talking about technical debt, and then the finance team talking about revenue. And on the surface of it, those two things can't be reconciled. But if they can both talk about the risks that they face, what's the risk of the technical debt? What's the risk of the revenue not meeting expectations? Then they're starting to get to the point where they can start to decide whose risk is more important and which one deserves to be dealt with. And is there a way that we can navigate through this where we can reduce both risks, or work to reduce, yeah, to find a happy medium between these problems.
So I can imagine that oftentimes people will genuinely see the same decision through very different kind of risk profiles. And I've seen this pop up a lot with microservices, for example, where some will see the benefits of introducing microservices, where somebody else is just going to see an awful lot of complexity that's getting added. Like how does this risk first methodology provide a mechanism to work through those differences?
It's a great one, isn't it? Because I remember when microservices first came about, and everyone was like, "Oh, this is the new shiny thing. We're all going to be doing this from now on." And over maybe a year or two from being exposed to that kind of way of thinking, the shine sort of wore off a bit, and people realized that this wasn't going to be a panacea, and that actually, what you'd, although you'd traded off this whole monolith, big builds and big deployments, what you got instead is all these network hops and gray failures and things like this. And so I guess from a sort of a rational post hoc perspective, it's kind of easy to see the trade-off now, the trade-off you're making between if you've gone, oh, we've got this monolithic application, we're moving to a microservices. You can sort of weigh up the pros and cons here and think, oh, well, we're moving away from the big releases and we're moving towards this sort of incremental, small releases. That's great. That improves our operational risk in this way. But then uh, the thing about that whole microservices trend was that I think at the point it happened, we didn't really understand all of these risks properly up front. There were like these hidden risks. People could see the benefits, the risks they were reducing from moving away from the monolithic sort of application style, but they didn't fully appreciate this idea that every method call was now going to be a network hop, and then debugging and tracing where things had gone wrong would become much more difficult. And then we had things like Splunk arrived, where you could start to trace these really problematic multi-server function call stack traces, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it's a really good example because it shows how that sort of hidden risk side of things was not anticipated in
I
advance.
remember you distinguishing between the attendant risks, the ones that you're aware of,
Mm.
and the hidden risks. Are there strategies that people should be using to try and uncover hidden risks, or is it just a matter of waiting and seeing? You try stuff and you learn from what isn't working.
Well, I mean, it's hard, right? Especially the obvious one is to tell stories and read widely and like try and get as much um, sort of institutional knowledge about this kind of stuff. That's something I talk about in the book. Is that one of the reasons that as a society, as a civilization, we have stories is to pass on this institutional knowledge and remind us about all these risks we've faced in the past. Um, so that's a key one, right? Um, uh, yeah, I think that's probably one of the main things that I talk about. And then, when you start to throw lots of people at a problem, looking at a particular scenario, then you start to get the benefit of multiple different points of view. And this is certainly something we see on FINOS projects as well. We have this AI governance framework, and we're going to get onto this more later, but I'm just going to throw this in now, where we have lots of different financial services firms coming together to agree on what the risks of running AI in production look like. And individually, they're probably not that great at enumerating all those, but as a group, they've got this breadth of experience of doing this stuff. So even though it's quite new, they can all bring a slightly different view to the table. And so there's a huge value in, safety in numbers in terms of like being able to do risk analysis together in big groups. And so that idea of risk frameworks being like a collection of people figuring out what a taxonomy of risk looked like for a particular subject area is kind of one of the main sort of things that I talk about in the book, and how useful that is from a software engineering perspective.
Between the first and the second editions of the book, obviously AI has become the thing. Do you tackle AI specifically in the second edition? Are there any specific AI aspects to AI that mean we should be approaching risk first differently in any way?
Yeah, so this was obviously a really big topic area for the second edition. Uh, when I wrote the first one in 2019, we didn't really have AI coding agents or ChatGPT or any of this sort of stuff. Um, but this is huge news now, and this is changing the face of software development in a big way. So obviously, I wanted to touch on this and see if the ideas of risk first could be applied to AI and whether it still made sense. You know, some ideas are being completely abandoned now that we have AI. Is this still important? So I set about sort of doing a sort of a risk first analysis and looking at how it applied to AI, and it does. It totally stacks up still. And as I just mentioned, the idea of this AI governance framework that FINOS has been working on shows how the idea of risk frameworks and risk analysis are completely relevant in the world of AI. It's very hard to write a chapter on a book when the landscape is
Mm.
changing. Everything's changing under you very, very quickly. But I think what it is clear to say is that this sort of risk framework, risk analysis approach is being thrown hard at the AI problem, and there are hundreds and hundreds of different teams around the world building risk frameworks about AI deployments for various different aspects of AI. So, like coding agents, working in finance, um, autonomous lethal weapons. What are the AI risks around that? Um, Climate change, cascading global failures of systems that are automated, all this kind of stuff. People are coming up with risk frameworks for all of these different areas. And so risk management and risk analysis actually turns out to be the one key tool that we can bring to this new technology that really seems to be paying dividends.
It sounds like you think that the financial services industry is taking AI risk seriously enough, and that there are all of these activities going on. Is that true? Should there be more being done?
Certainly, the ones I talk to are very serious about it. I can't. So, as you said at the beginning, I work for FINOS, and FINOS is the financial services arm of the Linux Foundation. So we are a foundation that supports financial services, and we have projects like this AI governance framework project that are trying to help financial services firms come together and work on AI safety within the specific use cases that they have. Um, Now we only have maybe 100 members, and there are thousands and thousands of banks in the world. So I can't really speak to what all those other banks are doing. But obviously, the ones that are turning up to the meetings and helping us push this framework forward are very, very committed to doing it right, doing it properly. Should more banks and more financial services firms join in and help? Absolutely. You know, as I said before, like the more people you have involved in this kind of thing, the better the risk models become. So I would like to see that happen more in the future. But yeah, any technology this important and this groundbreaking is going to have its downsides, and so it absolutely behooves us to treat it respectfully and figure out the best way to deploy it.
And there's a few directions I'd like to take that in. But first, there are a few AI governance frameworks in the mix now. Um, what is it that Finos's AI governance framework adds? I'm guessing it's a focus on financial services AI governance specifically. Can you help me understand what that means?
Yeah, so I think before I do that, so the idea of a risk framework, I just call them all risk frameworks in the risk first book, but the idea of a risk framework is that you try and break down the different risks that you're facing for a particular subject area. And then having done that, you try and work out what the mitigations or controls are that you have for those risks. And in risk first, we call them either practices or actions, things you're going to do about the risks. And so when so the AI governance framework from Finos fits into this sort of definition of a risk framework. And so we have 20 or 30 different risks that we've broken down, and then around the same number of controls that we've put together. And that's the use case or the subject area is very specific. It's all about financial services firms deploying AI in production use cases um, in their firms. So either facing customers or facing internal staff. And what do you need to, how do you do that safely and in a way that it's not going to go horribly wrong for you? So to give you an example of a few of the risks they're talking about, one might be like um, the idea of the AI doing something that it doesn't have permissions to do, or returning some data to the user that they shouldn't be allowed to have. So maybe like via a prompt, an injection prompt attack, or the user just saying something and it giving them back too much data. Well, what can you do about that? One thing you can do is you can have a lot of test cases and a lot of evaluations. Another thing you can do is you can have like some kind of firewall in front of the AI that checks the results and checks what it's responding and what it's saying back. Another thing you should be doing is making sure you audit everything that gets reported so that you can go back through and check and to see why things happened uh, if, and sort of course correct in the future. And there's a bunch of other like mitigations or controls that you can put in place. So so I guess that's the specific thing that we're trying to address with the AI framework. But one of the things I talk about in the Risk First book is that there's an MIT database where they've pulled together like 200 different AI risk frameworks for all sorts of different purposes, like I mentioned before. Many of them are very, very different use cases from the one that we're looking at in finance, like maybe healthcare or automotive. You know, they're very different areas that require very different treatment of risks, and the risks have different, you know, impacts and probabilities and things like that.
It seems like, and you mentioned before about kind of storytelling and learning from each other. It seems like there could be a process here where adopting a governance framework isn't just about understanding a bunch of controls that you should be employing, but also sharing information about near misses and areas where maybe the controls aren't sufficient, or there are always human factors involved. Compliance is not just about dotting the i's and crossing the t's. So does Finos get involved at that kind of level as well in helping to observe how things are working in practice and maybe iterate on these governance frameworks, share best practices as well?
That's certainly something we're looking at. This is quite a new framework, but we are certainly interested in pursuing that in the future. We might be offering some kind of like auditing or like certification process around this project, and that's true for other Finos projects as well. We have kind of like certifications that we deliver. So yeah, it could well happen. Yeah.
And we talked previously about how this AI moment is a enormously significant one, not just in financial services, of course, but culturally, it's affecting all knowledge work. Um, it seems like one of the most significant things to happen. It's not just a technology that's introducing new risk. There are whole business transformation initiatives going on as well. Uh, it seems like there's a very broad cluster of risks that sit beyond the pure technology as well. Is how should organizations be kind of managing those? Is that we need to be looking beyond AI governance to more significant changes and the impacts of those on companies?
Yeah. I mean, as you say, this is a huge. This feels like a huge shift in our jobs. Essentially, I don't know about you, Henry, but I feel like in my life I've probably seen just a couple of other things like this of the similar kind of uh, scope
Yeah.
and size of change. Um, do you remember there was the No Silver Bullets um, article? Okay, who is that by now?
I forget.
It's going to come to me in a minute, but the idea of no silver bullets was like we've found all the best ways of doing computer science, and we're not going to see any new ones. Anyway, since that article was written, there've been loads, and some of the main ones. Like I remember when after Java came out, the open source ecosystem absolutely ballooned in size because somehow Java made it really easy to write open source and deliver open source components, and we got things like Maven and all these build tools and things, and that felt like a huge force multiplier for developing. And then like the change to mobile as well, that felt like another massive like generational shift in how computing was done, and everyone now has a mobile phone in their pocket. That seemed completely unbelievable a couple, 20 years ago.
Mm.
So yeah, whilst our lives are changing because of these things, it changes the whole of society and the whole of civilization as well, doesn't it? And so, yeah, whilst AI feels like another silver bullet in terms of software development, we can get stuff done so much more quickly and so much more effectively, but there are huge downsides. You know, it's easy to write 1,000 lines of code now. That's got good sides and bad sides. But yes, there's going to be a huge effect on society as well, and it's kind of hard to see how that's going to pan out. People are obviously worried about their jobs. That's a big one, right? People are, and I talk about a lot of these in the book as well, like some of the key risk factors for civilization. Um, and I go through a bunch of those and talk about how well the book doesn't really contain answers to these or what we have to do about them, but it does sort of say
That's fair enough.
these are forming part of a risk framework around AI at a societal level, and people are working on this stuff. So, I guess the point the book tries to make is that this is being addressed from a risk management perspective, and that is our best tool for sorting this stuff out. But I guess one of the points we probably should touch on in the book is the idea that I try and point out that all work is risk management, and what we've been talking about here seems a long way away from maybe the everyday concerns of developers. But really, what I'm trying to do in the book is to point out that all the work that they're doing is risk management, and when they're fixing bugs in their backlog, that's risk management. When they're using AI tools to get code written faster, getting stuff written faster is also a form of risk management. There are risks being managed by doing that. And then consequently, if you end up with more technical debt in your code, that's sort of the downside of what you've done there. That's the trade-off you made by using these tools to get stuff done. So that's a risk management decision you're making right there.
One of the things that I really appreciated was the rundown of different types of risk. Like you'd taken the time to draw together. I'm not sure how many it was. It feels like several tens of different types of risk. And it feels
Several tens, yeah.
it looks like a useful thing to remind yourself of when you're wrestling with a decision, some kind of dilemma about a way forwards. It's probably something that would be useful to have in your back pocket to just go, have I missed anything here? I'm gonna check and see whether I've neglected to consider a particular kind of risk. It might force you to look at something in a slightly different way.
Yeah, that's right. So that's like the second part of the book, looking at all these so the reason I did this was that so we talked a bit about like Agile and how that works. And Agile is it kind of gives you a whole bunch of activities and practices that you can employ to get software done better. But in terms of a risk framework, it's kind of thin on, I just described a risk framework as being two things, like a list of risks and then a list of things you're doing about those risks. And so Agile as an idea was very long on the second part, what you're doing about it, but very short on describing exactly why you're doing it and all the risks that you're trying to deal with. And so it seemed important to me to try and actually enumerate all of those risks that as software developers we face on an everyday basis. Things like we've talked about, dependency risks or funding risks or communication risk between either you and the rest of your team or different parts of your software process, complexity risk and coordination risk, operational risk, all of these different sort of aspects of risks of actually running software in a production environment or building software. These are all things that we face on an everyday basis, but we don't really pin them down and give names to them and describe them in detail. And and various agile books that you read will not actually go into all of this kind of detail on describing all these different things. They'll just say, have a sprint review. But have they described why you're doing that? Oh, it's so you can learn things from what went wrong. Yeah, but why? Why is that happening? What risks are you managing by doing that?
It's cargo culting, isn't it? When you're going through the processes without really understanding what they were designed to be achieving.
I guess, yeah. Yeah, I guess that's exactly it.
And
so I kind of wanted to supply that missing part of the
yeah,
manual.
well, I mean, it's massive. Like I'm sure we've all worked for in teams and organizations where the agile ceremonies are followed, but engagement is low and energy is low, and the teams maybe aren't adapting the process to their own needs because it's the process which has been applied and it's kind of become disconnected from the risks that it was originally designed to be
Yeah.
solving.
Yeah, it's a common problem.
So we've mentioned FINOS a few times, and in the context of AI, but I wonder whether we can shift away from AI at least for a moment, because you're chief architect at FINOS, and perhaps you can give us a more rounded picture about what FINOS is for.
I'm going to give it a go. So yeah, I think I already said FINOS is part of the Linux Foundation, and we are a foundation in our own right. That means we have members consisting of financial services firms and also sort of companies like JUXT, who are like working in the ecosystem of financial services, supplying services to financial services firms. So we have like cloud providers and consultancies. And the idea of a foundation is that all of these firms can get together and work on open source projects on a sort of a level playing field. The governance is managed by FINOS in a sort of a fair and even-handed way, rather than being run by any one particular firm. So there's recourse there, but so that's part of it, right? We are an open source foundation, and we're trying to run projects where financial services firms can join in, and those projects are specific to financial services. But I think the broader goal is to try and help financial services make the most out of open source. And as I said earlier, I think open source is one of those silver bullets. It's a huge force multiplier, and so the more that financial services can get out of it, the better they can do their jobs.
And financial institutions are ferociously competitive,
Yes.
and so it must be quite a challenge to get them to collaborate rather than guarding their own kind of proprietary advantage.
Yeah, so let's go through the problems. Yeah, first of all, they are very competitive. They're all that's one cultural aspect that you have to overcome. Is like, if I'm giving away code to an open source project, isn't that just giving my competitors a leg up? Why would I want to do that? And the answer is, well, there's lots of reasons why you would want to do that. If you want your code to be really high quality, then the more eyeballs you have on it, the better it's going to be. If you want other people to help you build it and share the cost of it, well, why not do that with your competitors? If it's not providing you with some kind of competitive advantage, then why not work on it open source and share the load? And then the other thing we've talked about is, as soon as you have an open source project, a lot of the time it will do like 90% of what you want or 95%, but maybe there'll be some bugs in it, or corner cases that apply in your firm. And if you're in the open source ecosystem and you're able to make those changes and improve that project, you get something that's tailored to what you need. It's perfect for what you need, as opposed to only 95% for what you need. And a common solution to this that financial services firms will adopt is just to fork the project and then run it internally. And then their problems begin because they have to maintain that fork. And in the open source version, there'll be all sorts of new features being added. And so they're kind of obliged to keep up with those. If the open source version has security fixes added, well, they're going to need to bring in those security fixes and apply them to their own project. Because if they don't do that, then they're going to have unpatched, insecure software running internally. So maintaining your own internal forks becomes a real, maintenance overhead. So again, that's the wrong way to go. If you're starting to create these internal forks of projects, then you're kind of creating a rod for your own back. So you may as well improve the open source version and share the load of maintenance and support for that.
And is there a kind of common type of project that financial institutions, are treating as kind of pre-competitive candidates for collaborating on in this kind of way?
I'll talk about a couple of specific ones that are kind of close to my heart, rather than. I think the answer is not really. We've got this really very varied ecosystem of projects, but I'll tell you about a few of the more successful ones so you can get a feel for this. So one of the projects I spend quite a lot of time on is FDC3. And FDC3 it's the idea of it is that it's to try and bridge the gap on a trader's desktop. And if you can imagine that, like those whole sort of Wall Street screenshots you've seen where people have like 10 different monitors and they're all shouting and there's like bar charts moving around all over the place. That's a lot of information and a lot of different applications all talking, all telling the trader something. And so FDC3 is a project that allows all those applications to kind of talk in a common language between each other and synchronize on the workflow. So if the trader starts looking at Tesla stock or something on one of its screens, he can then get all the other screens to update to show the related news about Tesla, or how much the holdings of Tesla, or who buys Tesla in their firm, or various different viewpoints. So this is a really useful open source project, and it's kind of a standard, and it kind of needs to be, because you obviously want this to be widely used across the industry, so that you develop an ecosystem around it, and everybody knows they can use it, and their software will work the same in various different environments. So that's a really good example of somewhere where FINOS can step in and help run a standard, and everybody benefits from it. And we have various different firms all contributing to that and helping push it forwards. We have maintainers from the likes of S&P, BlackRock, Morgan Stanley, NatWest, just to name a few, all sort of coming along and helping out and trying to push this forwards, because they recognize the benefit that it's going to give their firm by having a better version of the FDC3 standard in their organization.
Awesome.
So that's one, right? A second example, CDM. So CDM is the common domain model. And this is a really ambitious project. The idea of it is to try and create like an object model for the entire financial services domain. So, Henry, I don't know if you've had a job in a bank where someone's asked you to build a trading system, and you've like knocked up some database tables and go, it's got a trade ID and it's got an expiry date and that kind of thing. Have you been there, or have you done?
I've been there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So a part of me always died when I had to do those kind of projects, because you always think, I know I'm doing this wrong. I know I'm just creating something half baked, and it's only going to support a few different trade types, and it's
Mhm.
not going to be complete. Well, the CDM is like, we're going to solve this problem once and for all. We're going to have a domain model that fits everything. It's got this sort of composable architecture where you can build any kind of financial product in it that you like, with any kind of crazy cash flows that you want to involve. And it's 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 a FINOS standard. It's got tooling around it. You can create bindings in various different languages. There's various different products that support it. It's being rolled out in several FINOS firms to um, move data within the firm, but then it's also being used between different firms as well.
Mm.
It's being used by crypto companies. They want a standard way of describing assets that they're going to trade. So it's kind of starting to see usage everywhere, and it's a really grand idea that could only exist within a foundation where you've got like this neutral arbitration, and then a whole bunch of different companies with a whole bunch of different experts in these different areas able to contribute to it and help push it forward.
It seems like the quintessential proof of the convening power of Finos to help get lots of eyeballs on a problem and solve it from lots of different angles. It's a very generic and complicated challenge that you're trying to solve that is opening up data transfer between organizations. I mean, it's
Right.
great
Yeah.
to see.
And another thing that I've spent a long time doing in banks is writing things that translate from one format into another format,
Hmm.
usually badly because the formats are completely incompatible in some way. And that all just goes away with CDM. If you just use CDM all the way through, all of that code can just be thrown in the bin. And then for regulatory reporting as well, it's like, why not? Why don't we just produce regulatory reports in CDM format?
Hmm.
Or if the regulators require us to do some calculation, we could write that calculation once. The inputs could be in CDM format and the outputs could be in whatever format the regulators need. And then everyone could use that. That code could be reused across the whole industry rather than everybody re-implementing the same regulations everywhere. So this is a powerful idea. And if we only, to be honest, if Finos only did this, this would be of huge benefit to the world. But we do other things as well.
um, so if people want to get involved, if they're hearing about this and either want to make use of those projects or have an idea for something that ought to be an open source project, how should they engage?
So there's a bunch of ways. If you're familiar with GitHub, if you're in GitHub all the time like I am, you can go to github.com/Finos, and there's a nice page there that like lists out a lot of the different projects and gives you like lots of jumping off points to get involved. Gives you links to meetings or links to the repos, um, sort of and the readmes and all this kind of stuff. So that's quite handy. We've got a calendar, calendar.finos.org, and that will take you to all the open public meetings that Finos is hosting. The great thing about this is, and you can click on them and just add them to your own calendar. And the great thing about this is that all of those meetings will be very, very happy to see you there. Um, they're usually, people just love that you take an interest. So you shouldn't feel like like an outsider. People are usually very happy to listen to you, to get your introduction, to understand why you're there, and to introduce you to the project. It's always nice to have new people turning up to meetings. So attend some Finos meetings. That's a really great way to get involved. The other big one is that we organize events as well. So every year we have these OSFF events, and Henry, you've been to a couple of these now, I think.
I have.
Yeah. So this is we have this. Well, in 2026 we're gonna have three. We've got one in Canada,
Oh,
Montreal, in March, and then we've got one in London in June, and then one in New York in November. And you can come along to these if you're working for a Finos member firm. you probably have some free tickets to this. So you could probably ask for a free ticket or try and get your firm to pay for a ticket to come along. But this is kind of the best way to really sort of figure out what we're doing, because it's a whole day event and you can just turn up. You can go and sit in on some talks about some FINOS projects. You can meet the maintainers. You can you can go chat to all sorts of other people that you might just bump into about what's happening in FINOS, and you can get a really good sense of what's going on. So that's a really great fun way of getting involved in open source.
I can vouch for that. I've enjoyed the couple of conferences I've been along to so far. Um, I'm curious about how, so that the driving of the adoption of open source in organizations, particularly ones which are so ruthlessly focused on the bottom line, must be a big challenge. I just wonder how you monitor the success, how you and how you tackle what I assume you must get pushback from people who are saying, why are we spending this time on open source? Maybe the benefits aren't so obvious to them."
Yeah, and so this is a huge part of what FINOS is trying to do, is to try and get financial services to embrace open source and to make the most of it. So we have this project called Open Source Readiness, and the idea of that is we can okay, so it's a risk framework, right? What we did is we looked at the risks of either engaging with or not engaging with open source to financial services firms, and we cataloged them all on the website. And then we looked at what activities you needed to do to manage these risks. And we also built a maturity model as well. So we said there are different levels of engagement. Starting at like level 1, you've got people in your organization who are downloading binaries from npm and adding them into their projects and using them. And that's great. They're using open source. But then that opens them up to all sorts of all the secondary issues, like, am I complying with licenses? What about supply chain security? Um, how's that looking? So then the second level of the maturity model is, well, okay, we're using open source, but are we using it in a controlled way? Are we using it in a managed way? Do we understand the risks? Do we understand what we're using, what we're not using, what security risks there are? Are we managing those? And so this is kind of our like level 2. And as you can imagine, like, the reason you want to get to level 2 is to reduce some of these risks, but then that kind of opens up new, hopefully slightly less bad risks. Um, like some of the ones I've already mentioned, like, okay, we're using open source, but now we want to make changes to the software. It's not quite doing what we like, and we're ending up forking stuff. So the next level is we're actually contributing back, and we're making changes to public projects, and this is like the level 3, contributing back. And obviously that introduces new risks as well. There is the risk that you accidentally divulge customer information in a project, or you reveal like a sensitive algorithm or something by mistake, or your developer says something stupid in an open source forum and brings terrible recrimination and embarrassment to your organization. So these are real risks that people worry about. And so what do you do about that? How do you manage those risks? And then higher up, we look at like joining foundations and using open source strategically. And so we kind of build up this entire sort of model of the risks you face at these different levels of maturity and the activities that you need people in your organization to be performing in order to mitigate those risks.
A risk
So
framework.
ironically, and that's a common theme though, Henry. It's like, the more I spend time in FINOS, the more projects seem to turn into, in front of my eyes, they turn into risk frameworks like like open source readiness, like the AI governance framework, common cloud controls, as well as another example of that. So yeah, it does seem to be a common theme of open source being a great way to create risk frameworks and manage risk.
And it seems like, although the focus of your work is these technical projects, open source projects, what you're trying to get the organizations to do is change culturally. Like it's a different stance, isn't it? Where you become more comfortable with collaboration, at least on those kind of pre-competitive and areas where there is benefit to doing so. Um, Perhaps this risk first way of looking at it is a way to address what might feel like quite a challenging message that you've got to convey because you're laying things out for people and talking about the pros and the cons.
Yeah, and I think it's it's super hard, right? Because culture culture exists for a reason, and banking has developed its own culture. It's quite a secretive culture, and it's like very guarded in terms of giving away information. Everything needs a password. Everything needs protecting. Everything needs careful thought, um, and a lot of that flies in the face of the open source culture, which is much more about let's put it out there, let's try things, let's just do stuff, let's put it on an open source repository. So there is a cultural difference here, but culture arises because of the risks that you're managing. That those cultural norms come about um, because of things like um, maybe somebody has put some messages on WhatsApp or something like that and got fined for it. Well, the culture is going to uh, it's going to change because of that. It's going to be, or we need to be very careful about what we communicate publicly. Or if you're sending code via emails or something, that culturally is well, both culturally and in terms of rules is a no in most organizations I've worked at in financial services. The culture kind of reflects the risks you have to manage, but they this culture predates open source. And
Mm.
so what we need is to try and help evolve that culture to allow for open source, all the benefits of open source that we've talked about, but also respect and still control for those risks that the culture was there for in the first place, like guarding customer secrets and things like that. And so that's a hard, circle to square, square to circle. Yeah, you're kind of trying to do two things at the same time there, and obviously different parts of the organization are there to control those different pieces of the culture and stop that happening. So FINOS is like a cultural change agent that hopefully we're trying to help the open source side um, of financial services to make its case and get these changes.
As you're talking about culture, and I'm thinking about identity, and how cultures might predate certain significant transitions. It's hard, of course, not for me to reflect on AI again, and the fact that software engineers, we've got a bunch of perhaps identity tied up in being craftspeople and builders, and uh, set of ways that we work that are informed by things that made sense in our pre-AI era, and now we've got these new tools to engage with. And we've already talked a lot about the risks that they carry, but I wonder if there's a similar kind of challenge that kind of software engineering is going through, where it's having to kind of reassess approaches, benefits in light of kind of new capabilities that maybe introduce a bit of cognitive dissonance and friction with the way that what we thought our work was.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you talked about this before we started, the idea that there is a big pushback in terms of software developers accepting AI tools. And I was thinking about this and thinking perhaps part of that is there's a very strong like maker culture. Like you said, it's like um, it's somehow seen to be better to be the person making the things than the person managing the making of the things. But I think what AI is doing in a way is like promoting you to that management position without necessarily you really wanting that. And so I can see how people would feel that it is de-skilling or changing their job in a way that they're not happy with. It's it's interesting, and I think I don't know what the answer to that
Yeah,
is.
we've
I
all
think
got a
we,
junior engineer who's our apprentice now. Well, in several, in fact,
yeah,
could be running several in parallel. We are the the manager, as you said,
mm,
for and perhaps a bit of product owner, a bit
yes,
of
definitely, yeah,
and providing the accountability and oversight as well
yeah.
that a team lead or a manager might.
But if you got into IT because you wanted your job to stay the same for 30 years, you've probably gone into the wrong industry, right? That was that was never part of the deal. I think, yeah, as I was saying earlier, I think the tech landscape has shifted massively, at least 3 or 4 times since I've been doing this, and AI is just the latest huge tectonic shift going on here,
Mm.
um, changing changing the nature of my job completely.
Well, we're
But
recording this
they're all
in
good in the hindsight, though, aren't they? I mean,
uh,
mainly.
uh, well, yeah. I mean, they are. It it reminds me of various other seismic transformations, um, and yeah, things shake out in the end, but they can be quite painful transitions for
Absolutely, yeah.
people.
Yes, very true. Yeah.
And I wonder, looking ahead, about uh, the industry that we have is optimized for the way things used to be, and this feels like such a significant transition, more so even than the move to cloud, for example, which sure changed the way that you built stuff and the kinds of things that you could build, but I don't think simultaneously kind of changed the identity of the people who were building it,
Mm.
the the uh, the speed at which they could work and the kinds of features that they could ship. So, I, I am super interested to see how this shakes out and whether what the impact is on engineers of all skill levels. We often talk about the impact on juniors and how we've
Mm.
got the missing rung problem. How are they going to get into the industry without kind of doing the work that they have hitherto been doing, if that's all outsourced to LLMs? There's changes to the way senior engineers are working as well.
Yeah. Do you want my hot take on this?
Please.
So I think so. People are all looking for this sort of AGI moment where the point at which the AI becomes as clever as you or I and can do the work that you or I do. But I actually feel like this is the wrong thing to be looking for. I feel like actually what it really is about is reliability. And if you look at humans, we've been in our current form, we've been around for a couple of 100,000 years on the planet. That's long-term reliability. This is something I've talked to you about before, right? But we've been proven over generations and generations and generations to just be able to keep the lights on and keep things going and just get through, regardless of what's happening, whether Mount Vesuvius erupts or there's floods or there's pestilence or plagues. Somehow humanity keeps on going and keeps on pushing on through. And this is a testament to the reliability of humans. And by comparison, I cannot leave cursor alone for more than a couple of minutes without it going completely off the rails and doing something absolutely crazy. And I don't think that that kind of long-term reliability is something you can create overnight. I think that does take tens of thousands of years to get right. And so I don't think that we're in any danger of being completely replaced. I think we are always going to be in the loop because I think we're needed for that kind of reliability. Everything humans have created, whether it's buildings or roads or railways or laptops or dishwashers, they're all kind of frail compared to the reliability that we bring to the table. Um, and those things kind of rely on us and our reliability to even to work. So I think we're good. honestly.
That's a reassuring note. I mean, we're getting towards the end now, but as we're in December, late December, recording this, you mentioned that maybe we should talk about some predictions for 2026,
Crikey, yeah.
and this seems like the perfect segue into. You mentioned 10,000 years there, but let's think
Just
a little more locally, like in the next year or two. What do you see happening?
I'd completely forgotten that I'd suggested this. How about you go first?
Well, I think we've touched on a few things that will be developed, but one of the areas that um, I'm really kind of hoping to see a resurgence in. This isn't so much a prediction, but I wonder whether, as organizations start to advance their AI deployments so that they're moving beyond tools that save a bit of time, that they're making people faster at doing whatever they were doing, whether that be software engineering or in some other business area, um, and maybe beyond even just you know predicting and projecting and bringing that kind of data science and ML um, kind of thinking to other areas, and get to the point where AI starts to break down organizational silos and be the mechanism by which data is shared around organizations. I can see that starting to happen and accelerate. I'm very interested in the implications of that. And we talk a lot about, or at least we hear a lot about, neurosymbolic architectures at the moment, where you've got this kind of hybrid of an LLM doing the vibes-based search, or finding patterns within semi-structured data, and how that can be combined with formal ontologies and more structured data and more structured rules engines operating on that data. And so I've got this kind of whimsical hope that maybe we see Prolog coming back, or
I didn't see
or
you going there.
something like that. Well, because constraints and constraint programming, it seems like if you play forwards the way that developers leverage AI, it's about setting up the constraints and saying, this is the problem we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
These are the things we can do. These are the things we can't, based on whether they be technical practicalities or organizational realities. So it's constraint programming. So if not Prolog, maybe we see a different kind of language coming to fill that gap.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Although I have a sort of, I have a slight concern around that. I think if you look at, so about when did Google start? 2005, something like that.
Oh, earlier than that,
Early
but yeah, I
noughties.
mean, another 5, yeah.
So there was a kind of a big movement at that point in time to have search engines in organizations. I remember like people going, oh, we could have our own internal version of Google and you'd be able to search the organization and find what you need, irrespective of where it is. And it never panned out. And the reason I think was that there were all these like um, sort of authentication boundaries between different services and systems. And so nobody was ever able to agree that the search engine was allowed to look at the stuff and then build an index out of it, because that would break the sort of the controls. And I kind of worry that we're going to fall into that same problem again with AI. If I'd like to decide, oh, I'm going to maybe if I'm working for Barclays or Deutsche Bank or something, let's have a Deutsche Bank AI and it can answer all the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Is it not going to fall into that same trap? That's my worry. And there are kind of a few
The trap of where you're not able to see data because you're not authorized to, or that is
you can't train the AI
information
because you're
transfer.
not giving it the data it needs because
Right.
of these trust boundaries and
Mm-hmm.
things. And there's a couple of examples where that seems to already be happening. Like Amazon basically prevented, I think it was Anthropic, from buying things on Amazon because they wanted which seems crazy, right? Why would you not want to allow an AI to buy stuff off Amazon if you're Amazon? This could be huge amounts of money, but they wanted to own the storefront. They wanted to be able to have people seeing the products. And so therefore they wanted real people to be looking at the products and being able to browse all the other stuff they have on Amazon, and therefore maybe buying more stuff. And so there's a court case, I
Hmm.
think, in progress around this now. And this is kind of interesting, right? Is because that could really curtail the abilities of AIs in public spaces from doing all the sorts of things you kind of want them to do, like booking flights or
Hmm.
arranging your dinner, your restaurant bookings or whatever. So it'd be interesting to see how that pans out, both in a corporate environment and also in the public environment.
Very interesting.
Okay, I got my predictions lined up.
Oh, go for it.
We got time, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Yeah. Go.
so so the first one, the good one, right, is that I think the ROI of programming projects is going to massively fall now, right? We're already seeing this happening, and I think that kind of really opens the floodgates on a lot of smaller businesses being able to afford to do AI, to do development projects that they previously wouldn't have been able to afford to do. So hopefully, like you said, we'll be starting to see more integrations and things going on. Uh, Hopefully, this will mean that companies are no longer just constrained with buying stuff from big box IT providers, and they can actually start to customize, build the workflows they want, which should be really interesting. Um, and what was my second one? Okay, yeah, my second one is really on point, right, for my FINOS job. So I'm starting to look at the improvements of these AI models and thinking, actually, they're kind of good enough. And even if they do improve this a bit, it's not going to be like 2x, 10x on where they are now. What we always see with open source is that open source kind of goes where the commercial products trailblaze. So at the moment, I don't know about you, Henry, but I'm spending a lot of money on tokens right now. And if I could run an open source LLM on my laptop, or even maybe a server underneath my laptop, that would probably save me quite a lot of money in the longer run. So I'm really hoping in the next year we see really well packaged open source alternatives to some of these really nice commercial offerings.
Hmm.
And I would imagine that's somewhere around the corner, and that would be an alternative, because right now it's costing me a fortune.
Yeah, we've got so much kind of computational power, often just sitting idle
I
on
feel
our
like it.
desks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the open weights models are not far behind the frontier models at the moment.
Yeah. And really, it's just about packaging it, isn't it? Because I just feel like setting that up on my laptop would be a bit of a faff
Hmm.
and probably take me the best part of an afternoon.
Hmm.
Maybe that's time well spent, but yeah, maybe it's a Christmas
Yeah,
project.
that sounds like some
but
tinkering over
but
the
but if
holiday
someone could just
period.
sort that out, like give me a binary to download and it runs, that would be a great open source project, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, so I had Olama running on my laptop for a while, and it's just not quite there yet when you're
Yeah.
using one of the open weights models, and to the to the extent and things are advancing so quickly that when Anthropic released their update to Opus in the last few weeks, I didn't arrive looking to stress test the new model. I I sort of shrugged and thought, oh yeah, new model, okay, so I'll just I'll continue my work as normal. But the responses were subtly better in a way that I hadn't. I wasn't, as I say, doing any kind of objective testing, but I was still surprised. I
Hmm.
wasn't looking for a difference, but I perceived one. And I think we've sort of almost crossed over some kind of uncanny valley now, where like the those benefits are they feel meaningful, material, and so it's the open weights models that I've been trying are just far enough behind that you become really aware of there being just slight deficiencies, become hyper aware of them. But I am sure that that's going to get resolved soon.
So we're still in the when cars were all about it goes 50 miles an hour, and we're still in that phase, right?
Yeah.
Of AI models, rather than in it's got an ashtray or a cup holder. We're not quite at that level yet. So there's lots. Yeah. So I guess whilst it's improving in a noticeable way, we're possibly not going to see a really good open source.
We've got 10,000 years before we reach human reliability.
So we'll schedule in the next one for that.
Yeah. See you then.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Henry.
Rob. I think we've probably got some links that we can put in the show notes, but it's risk first software development.
Yes.
In all good bookshops, early 2026.
Yeah, and check out the link for a way to get a free copy, which you can have a look at.
Amazing. Okay.
And I'm Rob at FINOS.org if you want to talk to me about FINOS projects or just anything to do with open source software. If you think you'd like some help with that, then let me know.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed.
Cheers, Henry.
Take care.